All right, all right. Hello, everyone. Look at us moving around here on frame already. Hey, everyone, welcome again to another exciting episode of In Your Element with Ardis and Eric. It's about 11:41. We always start these things a little bit later. You know, we want to make sure you have a chance to get a bite to eat, get your lunch, and get settled in. My name's Eric Stoller, VP of Product Strategy for Element451. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, founder and CEO of Element451, Ardis Kadiu. Ardis, how you doing today?
Hey, Eric. Good morning. How are you? Doing great. I'm
It
doing
feels like
great.
afternoon already to me, I gotta say. It's just that
Yes.
time. It's just that time of day, and it's a Wednesday, which always feels like a Friday in some cases. But as usual, this is our higher ed news roundup show where we discuss kind of some of the most salient topics in higher education news. We cover everything from ed tech to the latest sort of admissions news, what's going on with some of the pandemic, as well as some sort of highlights with some of our client institutions, which is we're going to lead off actually some awesome news with one of our partner schools, Howard University. I saw that piece of news this morning. Which is really exciting. Howard University wiping out student debt for juniors and seniors. Sorry, freshmen. Sorry, sophomores, but you haven't accumulated as much yet. So hopefully it's not as much of a crunch. But I think it's really interesting that a number of HBCUs, obviously historically Black colleges and universities, are using some of the Biden funding, the stimulus money to sort of relieve the debt burden, if you will, with students, which I just thought was a really good story to kind of start the show off with in terms of the news. It's a drop in the bucket in the overall kind of like debt sphere, but you got to start somewhere, I guess. Ardis, any thoughts?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's one of those things where we're going to see this happening a lot more. We've talked about this before. It's Howard University. So traditionally, they are one of the elite HBCUs out there, and an education from Howard University, HU, I guess we can call them. It's very, very in demand these days. So I don't think they have a problem at this point in terms of recruiting. So putting everything towards students makes a lot of sense for them as well. It's
definitely,
and given the population of students they serve, this is, amazing that they're able to do that.
Yeah, so they're this bit from their president here, in a statement that basically if you had an expected family contribution, if your EFC was $1, which honestly that was what I put in when I did my FAFSA, to be honest. And so if you have an outstanding balance for spring 2021, the university is going to eliminate all their current debt, which just in like the last 18 months or so, been extremely stressful for a lot of people. I'd imagine, what a relief for those students, and in many ways, what a sort of rocket kind of propulsion effect for them, because they're going to be graduating a lot of these seniors, and so knowing that they're kind of entering the job market, or graduating from Howard and going on to bigger, better things, what have you, that they don't have that debt burden on their shoulders. So it's got to be a really good feeling. And but the story, of course, is still that $1.7 trillion, as it's said here in Business Insider, the student debt crisis. That's insane money.
That's I think we are going to hear a lot more about the student debt crisis. It's going to be front and center in a lot of legislation that's probably going to come out. So this is not the end of it. And obviously, as you mentioned, it's a drop in the bucket for some of these students and the amount of money that's in there. But it's huge topic that it's going to be coming front and center for higher education.
Yeah, it just goes to show you there's never, I guess, a dull moment in higher education when it comes to just sort of the evolution of things. I mean, I can't even imagine when I was in school, this idea of debt forgiveness, and it's been a hot topic for a long time. So good to see that the institutions are making some interesting plays there to just really, at the end of the day, make things better for students.
Well, one more thing to talk about, just this whole notion of how we have personal finances here in the, somebody can declare bankruptcy, and student loan debt is one of the things that you
You
cannot. It's not.
cannot.
It's not forgiven. So even if you go into bankruptcy, that is one of the debts that you cannot get out of. So it makes it really, really difficult for that family if there's hardship, or it makes it really difficult for that student to essentially go into a lot of debt as they enter their career. Then it becomes the choices that they decide to go after in terms of the jobs have to be less selective, and they have to be based on paying that student loan debt rather than what's
Right.
best for their career to move. So upward mobility then
Yeah.
becomes even more disproportional when we start talking about students of color, or underprivileged students, where they now have to pay that debt right away rather than kind of try to find the best career for them. And we're seeing this more and more. So
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the sort of like financial differences between different generations, and
mhm.
like all the articles around like Gen Z and millennials and like savings and all this stuff versus like I don't know the boomers or Gen X or what have you, and it's definitely it's the chart has not skewed in a positive direction as the cost to attend higher education has gone up and people have accumulated greater debt. And I don't know about you, artists, but when I was 18, I was indestructible and wasn't thinking about the sort of the financial decisions I was making at 18, how that would impact me at maybe like age 30. Age 30, clear beyond my universal view of things. So for a lot of students, this is a really important discussion. Impacts
Yep.
people's lives, families. It's a big deal. And also, I think one thing that's come out of the pandemic is that um, I can't remember the exact phrasing for it, but basically you don't have to make your financial aid payments. They keep pushing that through to continue that sort of, if you don't want to pay or you can't pay, you don't have to pay. And I think one of the realizations of that, the outcomes of that, is that the economy didn't like self-destruct. And some people kept paying on their financial aid debts, but some haven't. So interesting conversation nonetheless, and a huge part of the political landscape going forward.
It was one of my main decisions for going to college, is where I got the most scholarships, and kind of keeping that together, and continuing to work throughout college in order to kind of pay for that additional extra that I had to go through. But it's super important, and I should be talking a lot more about it. And it's one of those things where there needs to be a lot more transparency around financing your education, and how how that's affected. Anyways, we can talk about it all day long. This is a topic that's that's really going to become more front and center.
Yeah, near and dear. Speaking of topics that are obviously of kind of big concern and whatnot, it seems like every episode we allocate a little bit of time to talking about the pandemic, talking about just COVID-19. And we have a comment that came in, by the way, from Todd Haleman. Todd is the new Chief Success Officer for Element451, just joining us today. And he says that institutions are integrating financial literacy advisors within their financial aid office to address this issue. Yeah, the issue of financial literacy is a big one. And I think that, it obviously encompasses financial aid, but it's even bigger than that. And, it's just part of the conversation around sort of what it is that you gain from the higher education experience. Because things like digital literacy have been discussed a long time, but financial literacy is also a big one, and a lot of institutions are incorporating that into either their financial aid office or their student affairs division as part of some of the outcomes that students will have. Because it's just like the career services office, help jumpstart your career aspirations, but also help jumpstart some of your financial literacy and economic aspirations.
Exactly.
Thanks, Todd, for getting us back on the financial aid conversation, which we'll continue to do. Also, we have at least one viewer on the show today, which is always good. Always a good reminder that there's someone out there watching us as we're doing this. So this article on Higher Ed Dive, very controversial in terms of headline and what it means. The Duke University is going to fire employees who aren't vaccinated against coronavirus. I think with the new approval of the FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, I think kind of pushed along some of these types of initiatives. Time will tell whether or not we see more of them. But excuse me, they're giving their employees some time to get the shot and kind of show proof that they are kind of making their way through that. Fortunately, and maybe this is kind of just like there's sort of the difference between reality and the headline, but more than 91% of Duke's 22,000 plus employees are already vaccinated. So the 9% of you that haven't, now is the time if you want to keep your job, I guess. So we'll see what happens with this one.
Some sensationalized headlines here as well. So we know
always dig in, right? Always read like this fine print, because I think when I read this, I thought to myself, okay, so it's almost it's not about. I mean, that's a super majority, right? 91%. So not a huge population of people at Duke who haven't yet got their vaccine, but still, top of mind and very topical. Speaking of topical and top of mind. I love that I'm logged in my Inside Higher Ed instance, so you can see my all my behind the scenes stuff here. But there's a red flag on transfers. That's the title of this article, and it's basically from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center around equity gaps with transfer rates during the pandemic. Students weren't transferring. Almost 200,000 transfer students between July 2020 and June 2021. They didn't transfer. Institutions lost that predictability, I guess, of transfer students moving from institution to institution, as well as quite a few racial inequalities in terms of like who sort of suffered the most as a result of the pandemic and the impact there.
Yeah, this is a common thread that we are weaving through all of these different topics, is the disproportional effect on different populations and how that's affecting different different institutions. So it's definitely a common thread that we're seeing. We are seeing the same thing on the FAFSA applications, like we talked about that last week. So this is certainly nothing new. But as transfers become, as we approach the enrollment cliff, and as kind of the first time students populations become less and less, a big part of the strategy for the schools is how do we get transfer students. So this has two types of effects on schools. One of them is now they need a bigger, more robust transfer program and transfer recruiting program, but then they also need to pay attention to their current students, right? So this persistence, and how do you make sure that those students are able to succeed and they're able to kind of continue and persist year after year, becomes an even more important aspect. We're seeing a lot of schools kind of bridging that gap between the enrollment and the admissions offices and the student success or the retention offices. So now those are becoming more of the model of how institutions are seeing their student populations. It's nothing new. We know that because we keep talking about this all the time. We talk about it in terms of how Element is able to help you recruit students and also kind of persist and engage with them after that enrollment. And that's kind of the trajectory that the product is also going into. We talk about it all the time. We write about it all the time. But you can see how the trend is a two-sided component, right? So you're going to be more fierce competition for transfer students. On one side, schools are going to want to have more transfer students, and on the other side, those schools that don't do a good enough job of maintaining those students and persisting those students are going to be in trouble, because the freshman population or the first-time population is declining slowly, and we have that enrollment cliff
that
coming
drop,
up.
yeah.
Yep.
And as I heard someone mention to me last week, they said a lot of people have kind of forgotten about that in a way, because we've had the pandemic being front and center, and obviously a massive distraction in that sense. But I think with transfer students too, this idea of credit liquidity, being able to articulate and transfer in credits so that they actually are applied for a degree program, it really matters. The experience for transfer students is quite different. They come in after having some experience already, but if they have a lot of credits that maybe don't come in and are applicable, that can obviously leave a sour taste in their mouth, and you want to make them have the best experience possible. And so, when I was an academic advisor, transfer students, the sort of engagement and support that they need is definitely different than first year students. And I think sometimes, not that they're forgotten about, but it's easy to focus, artists, as you know, on the first year student, as opposed to those transfer students. So just an interesting report there on Inside Higher Ed. Another Inside Higher Ed article, how COVID-19 changed college admissions. It's kind of a big one there. But there's quite a bit of stuff in terms of like the Common App releasing some info, which is,
Yep.
I mean, the data there is unreal, right? More than 1 million people applied to 900 plus colleges in the Common App environment, which is a huge data set. And just looking at in terms of like test scores, and we've talked about test scores and test optional and how that's changed things, and how few people actually put in their test scores this last go round in terms of the SAT or the ACT. Here it is. The number in March was 44% compared to 77%. That's a huge drop. I mean, it's a massive drop. And when institutions look at their classes, the incoming classes, and just in terms of like looking at like potential for success and persistence and all that data that they've kind of been used to relying on, it changes things, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I mean, again, another these themes that come up over and over again. Yes, test scores are going to be less and less important, and we're seeing that already. So now we have an even bigger data point, which is the Common App. So how do we change our operations, and how those schools change their operations around the test optional component, which is a lot of them, they instituted as a temporary initiative, but we for sure believe that it's going to be a longer term play for a lot of schools, and they're going to keep that test optionality going forward.
Yeah. Well, I love the data in this article, in terms of how students kind of use some of that extra time as deadlines were extended, by an average of 26.19 days, which is a huge extension. I mean, it seems like you want to talk about the funnel being gone, and it's sort of like, when is admission season?
Yeah.
It's just one giant admissions time.
Well, so rolling admissions, maybe they'll be here to stay. But one of the things that we're talking to a lot of schools, and as we're talking to a lot of organizations as well, that are supporting member organizations like NAGAP and ACRO and NACAC as well. So all of those organizations are, the members are in need of, how do we, the funnel is out of the window, right? It's thrown out. Like we can't rely on that year-over-year data anymore. So how do we now how do we work differently, and how do we work with the data that we have differently, and how do we build models that are fitting better to the current situation, right? So the funnel is gone. We can't rely on that anymore. We need different ways of engaging with our students. We need different ways of predicting and forecasting our classes. And that is a topic that's becoming more and more important. And one of the things that we're addressing is, how do we bring that literacy into those offices? We have our enrollment analytics course that we're starting in 2 weeks. And what's one of the questions that we want to answer with that course is, okay, changing the funnel from this traditional way of measuring students to a more stream-based approach, and predicting and kind of forecasting those classes based on how those students are engaging more shorter time periods, rather than kind of this year-over-year type data.
Yeah, exactly. Got a couple more news stories to go through here, as we always go along with the news show, because there's always stuff to talk about.
Yeah,
I thought this was really
more commentary today, Eric. So there's
yeah, it's good. And I thanks Lawson Hardrick III for shouting out to us for the show. Really appreciate that. By the way, on the call to action, the marketing comms in higher ed blog on Inside Higher Ed, I thought it was a really interesting story. Is your college communication strategy ready for Gen Z 2.0? because a lot of the stuff that we talk about here at Element 451 is communication, campaigns,
Yep.
Kind of getting the right message to the right students so you can connect them to the right school at the right time. And it's just a good piece too. If you get a chance to peruse it for our viewers later, you can take a look at this piece on Inside Higher Ed, just in terms of how, again, the pandemic kind of influenced institutional communication and the many things that students were juggling, from food insecurity, housing insecurity as well, and what kind of resources you might be sending out to students. Really interesting piece, though, in terms of how you communicate with this generation, and a lot of obviously empathy. And it talks about here to say use fewer directives, employ friendlier language, combination of first person, present tense. Again, there's that balance, in terms of how sort of informal you communicate with your students in messaging. Grammar and punctuation still matters. This isn't like a text from my mom, who always abbreviates stuff as if she's still using, like, what was that, T9 or whatever? My mom still, even though she has a smartphone, she abbreviates every word as if she's got to like make every character count. And so I think, stuff like this is just really useful when you frame your overall communication strategy with prospective students who, as we've shown in some of the other news articles, transfer students, older students, non-traditional. Who are you communicating with?
Yes. Yep.
And what do we got else here? Ooh, I thought this was good. This is from Teresa Valerio Parra and Aaron Hennessy on empty campus communications can't replace real diversity, equity, and inclusion work, also known as DEI. It's one thing to say we're sort of trying to build a diverse class, or we're using DEI language in messaging, but sort of the words have to match up with action. And as someone who myself has been engaged in sort of this like digital engagement space for a long time, and with Element 451, it matters, right? We've talked with a lot of our partners, schools, that they're using the ability to personalize messaging out of Element to really reach students, right, in a way that's meaningful and has depth. So again, another interesting read as you go through here and take a look on Higher Ed Dive. I know, Ardis, you and I are both fans of Higher Ed Dive, of course.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. DEI is not just one of those things that's very front and center for higher ed institutions. It's front and center for industry and companies as well. We're certainly part of that. And one of the things that we need to do is there's the higher education, but there's also a lot of the ecosystem that supports higher education right now. So we need to do a better job at that as well. And one of the you gotta walk the talk sometimes, right? So that's one of the things that we need to be really good at.
Absolutely. One more article here from Ed Scoop. Always feel like it's an ice cream shop that focuses on education. But Deloitte boosts higher ed data business with Entigence acquisition. I hope I don't have to say that company name any more times, because I'm not going to do a good job of it. Ardis, you shared this article with me.
So raise of a hand. So one of the reasons why I shared this article is because it mentions us in Deloitte. It mentions Element 451 as part of Deloitte, Ellucian, and also Element 451 in terms of incorporating AI to kind of go through data and kind of help institutions understand their operations. So now, I don't know how many of you know, but Deloitte plays a huge part in higher education as they provide a lot of services for them. But you can see the trend, right? You can see the trend that data has become the new currency for a lot of this, these companies. Right now, my reading list is full of books around data, operationalizing data, monetizing data. How do you make analytics kind of core and AI, and how that all affects? So we've gone through the last couple of decades where data has been the central, it's been flowing a lot from the technology itself. But now a lot of institutions, a lot of companies are starting to think about it and monetizing that data, and also making it central to the operations and driving a lot of decision making around it. So until now, it's been in the uh, in the space of technology, but it's moving more and becoming core to strategic decisioning and decision making.
Yep.
So it's one of those things where we've talked a lot about data-driven decision making, data-driven enrollment, data-driven everything. But you can talk all you want, but we gotta again walk the talk. So that's the message overall here, is that companies are going to be there to support you, but at the end of the day, it's all about the people and how you operationalize that data. So
Yeah. And it's a scale issue. I think, a lot of times institutions have great pools of data. They have data warehouses or data lakes or what is it?
lake
Lake
houses.
houses. Yep. I knew it was going to
Well,
come.
there's more after that. There's data fabric as well. So we can talk about a few more
A few more
data.
iterations of ways in which data is sort of stored, housed, used, collected.
Exactly.
But I think it's about how you're scanning that data and using it, and not having to. I mean, you need an army of people to kind of do the things that AI and machine learning can do. And I think that's kind of, one of the things that people always ask about when it comes to AI and data: is this going to take my job, right? Is this going to limit? And it doesn't take away your job. You just have to learn how to use the data and the AI that's kind of helping assist you to make your job more meaningful, or it lets you focus on the things that you couldn't do because you were busy doing other tasks that now the computer or the software can do for you.
Exactly.
So cool. Well, we're at what, 27 minutes, longest episode ever for our higher ed news show. But interestingly enough, this is actually my last episode of In Your Element with Ardis and Eric. It's my last day actually with Element 451. I've decided to go into full-time 100% dad mode and sail away from Element 451. Always a fan, cheering from the sidelines, but I'm just going to be with my two kids day to day now. So thanks so much, Ardis, for letting me sort of run this show and put this initiative out there for the company.
Eric, it's been a pleasure. We wish you all the best, and it's one of those decisions where everybody is rooting for you, right? Being with your kids and having the ability to do that. And as we talk about the pandemic and all the different impacts, it's glad to have had you here as part of the Element team. We're thankful for kind of starting a lot of these initiatives, and now as we'll continue the show. So the show will continue.
Yeah, the show goes on.
The show goes on. We will switch it from Ardis and Eric to another E as well. So
yeah. You got to have another Ardis and so. It's you're going to continue now. And whoever takes over, with Ardis, just make sure you interrupt him, ask questions, and it's been a great ride. Thanks so much from myself and my family. It's been a really good time being on board with Element 451, and I really look forward to just seeing all the wonderful, great things that you release as a company to your clients.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ardis. See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.